So imagine for just a second that human evolution has actually stopped being about biology. What if the absolute next monumental leap for our species is entirely intellectual? I mean, what if we are literally building a planetary network of minds right now, like a global, conscious brain, and artificial intelligence is the actual engine powering the whole thing?
Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are exploring a truly massive paradigm shift. We're going to take a concept that started out as this abstract early 20th century philosophy and connect it directly to the modern tech reality that you and I interact with every single day. We're looking at the noosphere. So, let's dive into how this century-old idea might actually be running on your laptop right this second. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. First, we've got the evolution of the planetary mind. Then we'll look at noospheric economics, AI as our technological catalyst, new noospheric jurisprudence, and finally, the modern researchers driving this forward. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The evolution of the planetary mind, from biosphere to conscious Earth. All right, so our foundational concept here is the noosphere, introduced by thinkers like Edouard Leroy, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, and Vladimir Vernadsky. It's essentially defined as a completely new state of the biosphere. But in this state, human rational activity and scientific thought become the actual determining factors in planetary evolution. Think of it kind of like a biological internet, an Earth-spanning network of thought where conscious human intention, rather than just blind natural selection, is what steers the future of our planet. Historically, according to this specific framework, Earth goes through three really distinct eras. First up is the biosphere, the era of blind biological evolution and natural selection. Second is the anthroposphere, where humans emerge and start altering the environment, often pretty destructively, and let's face it, without a unified plan. And finally, the ultimate goal, the noosphere. This is an era of consciously managed projective evolution, where nature and society actually co-evolve in harmony. Moving on to Section 2, noospheric economics, where intellect is basically the new wealth. The source material outlines a massive, fundamental restructuring of global economics here. Under traditional capitalism, you know the drill, the primary focus is squarely on capital and private ownership. But under noospherism, that focus shifts entirely to intellect, knowledge, and skills. The economic goal literally moves away from a consuming and producing economy to what these researchers call a restoring and co-evolution economy. And the ownership model, it transitions from private and corporate to planetary and intellectual. So we're talking about a system where the exchange of knowledge completely replaces the exchange of purely physical capital. Now, you might be wondering, when does this actually happen? Well, the researchers in our sources make a really specific and honestly fascinating claim. They state that the preconditions for this noospheric economy kick in when Earth hits a population of 5 billion people. But, and this is a big but, at least 0.3% of them need to be scientists, inventors, and innovators, and about 60% have to be skilled workers. If you run those numbers, the fundamental ingredients for this huge planetary shift, well, they're already here. All right, Section 3. AI as a technological catalyst. Building the infrastructure of this global mind today. To ground all this abstract Gary into our present-day reality, let's look at the tools that are acting as real-world instruments of this planetary regulation right now. The sources highlight systems like Microsoft's Copilot, right? This deeply integrates with corporate data via the Microsoft Graph to automate our daily workflows. On the flip side, you've got models like Gemini and Claude offering massive context windows, up to 2 million tokens. To put that into perspective, that's basically the ability to process thousands of pages of text in mere seconds, which allows for some incredibly deep, open research. In the context of the noosphere, these aren't just neat software updates. They are the early synapses of a global brain, processing information at a scale we simply couldn't achieve on our own. So how exactly does AI accelerate this whole transition? Well, AI isn't just an app. It's seen here as a literal instrument of planetary regulation. By maximizing our thought capacity through immense data processing and by spinning up digital autonomous agents as new structural elements of society, AI creates the intellectual foundation that's required to sustain a noospheric economy. It is essentially the bridge between human intent and planetary execution. With a completely new economy and new technological infrastructure comes the need for totally new laws. Section 4, new noospheric jurisprudence. Try to imagine a legal framework designed not just for individuals, but for a planetary mind. The sources present some seriously profound philosophical arguments when it comes to law. Take this quote, for example: "Evolution devalues natural rights, alienating man from life via death." So the argument they're making here is that traditional legal systems fundamentally fail to protect the ultimate rights of a conscious being. Why? Because nature itself, through the inevitability of death, strips those rights away. Therefore, a truly noospheric legal system has to look completely beyond our current biological limitations. Because of that philosophy, noospheric jurisprudence proposes some honestly mind-bending new natural rights. Just reporting neutrally from the sources here, these include the right to absolute life, which is essentially the pursuit of immortality. I know it sounds a lot like science fiction, but they also propose the right to love, the right to communication, and the right to cultural evolution and victory. On top of that, there's a huge emphasis on the absolute protection of intellectual and spiritual property, paired with a strict duty to protect health. It's a framework that basically treats human consciousness as something sacred that must be preserved and expanded at all costs. Now, if that sounds purely utopian, the sources remind us to actually look at the real-world legal frameworks emerging today. We are already laying the groundwork. The EU AI Act of 2024 is the very beginning of regulating these cognitive tools. And beyond that, we're seeing intense ethical debates right now around organoid intelligence, or OI. If you haven't heard of it, OI literally involves using lab-grown human brain tissue to power computers. So we are actively having to define the legal and moral status of entirely new types of intelligence right now. Section 5. Modern Researchers of Noospherism, the Map Makers of the Future. The sources cite a really fascinating array of modern academics who are acting as the architects of this transition. Think of them as a highly specialized task force. You have clinician looking at how language, or the word, acts as an intermediary in information society law. Then Olenikov and Onosov are digging deep into the historical, socio-natural roots of Russian cosmism. On the more practical side, researchers like Nikotenko, Andreev, Gordina, and Kuznetsova are actively drafting the blueprints for noospheric economics and structural analysis. And then you have S.G. Simonova, who proposes the active evolutionary philosophy that underlies this whole shebang. Together, they aren't just philosophizing in a vacuum. They're actively trying to map out a society run entirely by intellect. Which leaves us with one massive, lingering question. As we stand on the brink of this monumental shift, building the infrastructure of a global brain token by token, we have to ask, will artificial intelligence be the tool that finally unites us into a cohesive planetary mind? Or will competing interests and fractured data streams ultimately fracture the noosphere before it even truly begins? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.